Good evening, everybody. My name is Melody McAllister, and thank you so much for tuning into my book chat. It's going to be especially creepy tonight. And if this is your first time joining us or you join us every chance you get, I want to thank you. You can catch this live broadcast every Wednesday from Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, and you can catch the replay on these same channels. I want to give a shout out to the Teacher Goals Connected School communities and Thrive in Edu community, and thank you for tuning in. And now I'd like to introduce educator and author Jeff Szpirglas, the author of a few books, and tonight we'll be talking about Tales from the Fringes of Fear. If you like The Goonies or Stranger Things, you're going to like Jeff's books. But he has a whole spectrum of books, and we're going to talk about that. So if you don't like scary books, he still has some books for you. If you would like a book that is fun to read with your kids or your older students, this is the book for you. My kids and I have had such a great time reading it this week, and we were learning things they didn't even realize they were learning. It was so much fun. We talked about themes, foreshadowing, and so much more, and we can't wait to get more of Jeff's books. I am so excited to welcome Jeff Szpirglas tonight. Jeff, how are you doing, and can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. Thanks for having me on the show. Very excited to talk about scary things. I got my first cold of the year, and I wasn't going to let that stop me or my voice from talking about all things scary. So I'm a teacher by day, currently teaching grade 3, 4, and 5 simultaneously. I've been teaching for it's a 3, 4, and a 4, 5 split that I'm helping out with. But I have been teaching since 2006, so pushing the better part of 20 years coming up on that. I'm a dad.
Nice.
I have twins that are, watching the Goldbergs right now in the other room, and there's a dog that just came home, so hopefully it's not too noisy. But so I'm a parent, I'm a teacher, and I love scary stories. I have written I'm getting close to 30 books. I've co-written several with my wife, who also just walked through the door, Danielle Saint-Onge. We do a lot of early reader chapter books together. But I really, really like scary things, and I love horror films. I'm a big Doctor Who fan, and I like old Doctor Who, the kind that you had to hide behind your sofa to watch back in the 70s and 80s. So I've written most recently some books for grown-ups, including this delightful thing that I can't open because it's too scary inside. It's Blood on Black Wax it's a book about horror movie soundtracks, and it was followed up with Planet Wax, which is a book all about science fiction soundtracks. There's lots of scary books. I've got Evil Eye, Denters of Doom. I would say the list is endless, but it does end. The ideas
It is finite.
Yeah.
You've got something for everyone because you have also some non-scary ones, but we're not going to talk about those tonight. No. But you can check out all of Jeff's books at I just dropped the link, so check out all of his books. It is so exciting. And some things that are resonating with me right now is, your kids are watching the Goldbergs, but that means that you like the 80s. So I love that. And you're into music because you just wrote something about a soundtrack. Can you lift that back up and tell us just a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I co-wrote these with Aaron Lupton, and he is the music editor at Rue Morgue magazine. It's published out of Toronto, but it's available quite freely in North America. So he and I kind of work on the soundtrack section of a horror magazine. So we came up with the idea of doing a book all about horror film soundtracks. And, the great thing is it meant that as a fan of this kind of music, we got to talk to all of our heroes. So we began by doing a 45-minute phoner with John Carpenter, who, said, come hang out with me backstage, which actually did happen. Henry Manfredini, we talked to Lalo Schifrin. So just like Halloween, Jaws, The Howling, all of your favorite scary movies, we kind of unpack the music. And then, the follow-up, I said, well, I grew up loving Star Wars and The Last Starfighter and, The Day the Earth Stood Still. Like, let's do a book about sci-fi soundtracks that are on vinyl and Krull. That one I can actually open it up because it's not too scary. Well, some of it's scary,
And that's okay.
Conan, Sword and the Sorcerer. So we got to interview a lot of the composers who worked on a lot of these films. So again, it was just, it's the kind of book that I'd go actively looking for. But, I got paid a little bit of money and I got an excuse to, call up my heroes and talk shop.
That is
What more?
amazing. I love that. How long have you been writing? Like, or what inspired you to start writing? Were you a writer before you were a teacher? I've got all these questions.
Yeah, I was.
Pick one.
I mean, I was writing little books, since I was like a little kid. I still have them. I'd have to actually get up and be off screen for a second. But I've been writing since I was really small. And I kind of began in television, in Canadian television, um, doing a lot of kids' TV. But I found that an opportunity kind of opened up at a Canadian magazine called Owl Magazine, which is really well known north of the border. Um, and I worked for them as an editor for quite some time as their kids page editor. And through one of their associated companies, I in about 2004 I did a nonfiction book about gross things, because gross books were all the rage at the time in the early 2000s. They just didn't have one,
Yes.
so I kept pitching them all my horror stories, and they were like, "Well, Jeff, we don't publish that." And I realized, wait a second, I should pitch them something they actually might publish. And I said, "Well, you guys don't have a gross book," and thus began a side career of publishing for children. And it's been, I was saying before the show, it's there are like peaks and valleys, but I think the biggest trough was when my kids were born. I thought, oh, that's the end of my writing career. But actually, within like 3 years, it got busier than it ever had been. And now the juggle is, parenting, teaching, and writing. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I rely on like a wind up screw on the back of
Right.
me going, and coffee.
How, what are your yeah, me too on the coffee. How do your kids like your books? Or do you involve them in the process?
Absolutely, yeah, totally. And I mean, this the book I wrote with my wife, Shark Bait, is actually based on we vacation in Nova Scotia every summer because my in-laws have a place out there, and it's based on OSearch, which is they're out of the states. They track sharks, they tag and track sharks in marine life, and we got obsessed with the sharks that now have, we've noticed have coming up to Nova Scotia. They probably have always been there, but now they've
Mm-hmm.
tracked them. And it was a story about a girl who's obsessed with. She gets sent to sailing camp, but she really wants to go looking for sharks. My son actually kind of like father like son, and like my love of all things scary has percolated down to him, and he's rewarded at the end of each week of a good week at school with a scary movie. Um, that is maybe just on our side of appropriate, but I think now like my books have like, because he's a grade 4 student, so books like these are kind of in rotation right now for him, and he can kind of read them
Right.
independently. So it's nice. And actually, even today, with one of the kids at my school, a grade 6 kid, he was like, "Wait a second, you were that guy who read the story to us like 2 years ago when you were a supply teacher." I'm like, "Yes." So it gives me good cred
Mm-hmm.
with the students too.
Heck yeah. I mean, so I read most most of this was always with my 5th grader and my 7th grader, but my 3rd grader, she tagged with us a little bit too. But some of the stories were a little creepy for her, like because they seem so real. Like and we'll go ahead and talk about the book that we read, Tales from the Fringes of Fear, because you it's not like gory. I mean, it gets a little bit scary and there's a little bit of blood and stuff like that, but mostly it's kind of scary because it's stuff that our kids are like into. And so and the kids like don't always make it out. This is not a happily ever after book.
No, I mean,
So, yeah.
it's,
But
well,
what
I
were
think,
you like?
well, they're
I'm
scary
sorry, I keep
stories, right?
interrupting.
They have to,
Mhm.
I feel like, especially horror when it's short, um, it almost they're like we just watched like a Twilight Zone before, my kids put on the Goldberg. It was my choice for TV. I'm like, well, we're watching Twilight Zone. They hadn't seen it, but it's a good, like, I think, my daughter was a little concerned. It was the one To Serve Man, where like they realized the aliens have this. It's the book To Serve Man is a cookbook, and she realized, what do they make it out alive? I'm like, well, not really, but I actually, there's it's so hyperbolic that, and especially the stories here that, you know, yeah, it doesn't work out well for many of the kids in the book, but
Yeah.
it's about the twist and the reveal and the payoff, right? It's they're health. I always thought they were healthy scares, and I think, you know, by making the horror supernatural and not making it too realistic, at least in terms of what happens in each scenario. I think the one that's closest to, you know, something that doesn't have a supernatural element is one in the first book that's set on a bus with a bus driver in a school bus, and there's a kid who finds a very unpleasant discovery in the back of the padding of a school bus. But even that, you know, it's realistic, but it goes too
Hmm.
far. And I think that, you know, young readers are the only difference between them and us is that they don't know the horror tropes yet. So like part of the fun is their discovery of all the little subgenres and all the twists. Like,
Yes.
no, you're learning them as you kind of go through these kinds of stories. And because like a lot of these stories, you know, play on, you know, my favorite types of horror stories. They're variations on a
Hmm.
theme. So if you start with something like this, you're bound to encounter a werewolf story again, but it's
Yeah.
different than my, excuse me, werewolf story. So, you know, and I always found it to be, a very comforting genre because I know that, you know, the typography of the horror landscape, and I know what should appear there. And I'm also I used to scare really easily, and now I don't because I know all the tricks. I love it when something scares me silly because it obviously is a story that has to do something different and is pushing the envelope. I always thought scary stories, scary movies are very progressive in that you can't keep relying on the same old tricks because you won't get scared
Hmm.
anymore. So,
It's
yeah,
true, it's true. I have to say I love your constant reference to the analog, like, there's such a theme with, like, the analog, and I think it's great for kids today because their parents are like us, we grew up in the analog days, and now we're into this digital, and so that relationship was pretty strong in this book, and we talked a lot about that, and it just I think that's also why it was just so enjoyable, as an experience for both my kids and me. It just like you were saying, you picked it out of your favorites, and that it did. It felt very familiar in a way, like, oh yeah, this reminds me of the Goosebumps, or reminds me, of the Twilight Zone in some ways, but also like my kids love Stranger Things, and
yeah,
that also goes back it makes reference to analog, and so it's just I think this is really popular with kids right now and probably always will be. There's a little bit about a spooky about the '80s. We've kind of made the '80s spooky, and I love that. That intrigues me. Um, so this is actually the second volume. Did you have was the one from the brain? Can you show that again?
yeah. I've got
Tales
them
from
both.
Beyond the Brain. Which one did you write first?
Ha. So Tales from the they were published almost back to back. I
Okay.
got very lucky. I've been pitching it for a while because I built up an arsenal of stories. And Orca, who I had a relationship with, I remember just pitching the idea, and I remember in my pitch saying, well, you know, horror is really big for kids right now, and Stranger Things at the time
Mhm.
was huge, and this almost nostalgic, you know, desire to have those kinds of stories. Like I grew up though with like fighting fantasy and a lot of these old like even these old scholastic books where the covers were more lurid. Um,
Oh, that's
you know,
true. Yes.
yeah, like I can even just if I walk off here, like look, I've got like of a different era, like you know, I find them at garage sales and like you
Mhm.
know like I found this in somebody's lending library. I got it just for the cover, but I feel like horror kind of has this interesting. We have this interesting relationship with the genre where it becomes very popular, and it was in the '80s. The '90s, you get like it kind of dropped out. You kind of get your scream or your meta horror, and
Oh,
it's
that's
come
right.
back and it comes back in the form of nostalgia now too, right? We look fondly back on bygone times. Um, and for me, the stories and tales, some of them were written when I was in university. But actually, what's interesting about for me, I associate this book with the birth of twin infants because I at the time I thought my writing day, my days of attempting to do a novel are done. So I'm just going to write for me as an exercise, and I'm going to write short stories because I don't have any brain capacity to go beyond that. And so I associate these stories with my kids when they were young. And actually, what is interesting is there's stories in here that are really strange, and they're fueled by not sleeping. And I don't think I can ever replicate some of the stories. There's one about like a popcorn kernel that gets stuck in someone's teeth, and it begins. It's like at the bridgehead of an alien invasion. It starts talking to him, but it's him talking to himself. And I was like, where does that even come? It's coming from my unconsciousness. So there's a
Right.
really weird, dreamy quality. And this one was like hey Jeff, do you want to do two? And I'm like, how am I going to write two? By the time, you never say no, you just say, yes, I'm going to write two. I'm going to write it right away. So this one was written in a flurry, which also means I didn't have time to censor myself. And that was my editor's job, who's excellent. Tanya Trafford is a great editor. And Stephen, why am I forgetting Stephen's name? Stephen Hughes, who did like the pictures in here. He's fabulous. And so this was written with like all guns ablaze and go, go, go. But there is something about writing something quickly. I mean, as a teacher, I'm always struggling, like, to write this way, write that way. There's so many different ways you're going to find creative inspiration, and sometimes desperation is the inspiration. I remember there's a story that we'll read later. The one you want me to read was actually inspired by my grade twos. I said, guys, I need to write a story. What am I writing one about? They're like, a lockdown. And I was right, like that's a real school problem that is scary.
It is.
And
it is.
And I approached it from a very different, not any lockdown that could ever happen. And yet the idea is like, well, what if the danger is in the locked in room? So they're obviously, every story is not set in school, but I felt like they're child protagonists, and I know the world of school. I know the world of an elementary school. I don't have to invent that.
Right.
So I don't need to
You talk about, and you do, a lot of it is set around school. You talk about real issues. That's what I'm going to say, is that the issues that you talk about are very relevant. And that's another reason why we loved this book, because it offers discussion points. It's like, it's scary and it's creepy, but it's also very real. And I can tell that you care about all children, because I felt like any child could pick this up and find something that resonated with them. And I applaud you for that. You used great names. Your illustrations were phenomenal. So Stephen Hughes, if you see this, great job. The illustrations really freaked out my little ones. So, I mean, they were scary. For sure, but you did an excellent job.
Thank you. They go so much further than I would ever like take. It's funny, because sometimes there are times where I would, hold back and not describe something, and then I get like what Stephen drew, and I was, wow, you went there. Power to you guys. Like, thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Orca, for exactly, with the snakes going the distance.
Like, I was trying, how can I wear the snakes? That was the creepiest one. I thought it was absolutely the creepiest one. And you can't even tell, but I put snakes like all up in my net behind me. I was trying to get all of the creepy, but that snake story was freaking crazy.
It's based on a place, like the Hibernaculum is based on where I would take my students to the Outdoor Education Center. And there is actually, the setup is true, that they found and across the street, this derelict house, and they had to take it down. And in the basement was the snakes were hibernating, and they basically took them from across the street and like housed them at the Outdoor Ed Center, and they built a hibernaculum. I was like, how is someone not writing a story about this? This is a great idea. You don't have to, go very far. There's always, as you know, as a teacher, there's always a story about something, right? There's always something going on. You're juggling 20 different problems a day. Those problems can always find a home in a story. And the short story is nice because, what's nice about it is it in its simplicity, you can address something very directly without having to like worry about having a character arc, And I also just like short, scary stories are usually like, they end with this kind of very pleasurable zing that a novel can do that, but a novel also asks a lot of you as a reader. It's a lot of your time to get through from one end to the other. And so you really have to, which I'm not knocking novels. I love novels, and I love trying to write them. but you're doing something a little bit different with them in terms of how you structure a character and how you have an arc from the beginning to the middle to the end. Whereas
Yes.
in some ways, there's a little bit of freedom here because I don't need to commit to somebody, a character. They can meet their end. Um, and
Right.
you can
And
tell nastier stories because like kids aren't necessarily nice to
yes.
each other. They can be very mean and cruel and vindictive, but which as we all can, and
Hmm.
and those are real legitimate feelings that we all have. We all have these feelings of being
Hmm.
angry and vengeful, and you know finding a healthy outlet for it. Uh, where I constantly in my day job am like, hey, when you said that thing to your friend, or that other kid who maybe is not your friend, it made them feel like this, and I have to scaffold so many problem
Hmm.
solving strategies. Whereas there is something nice when like someone is saying the thing that you feel. It's very cathartic.
It is.
Sometimes there's a bad ending for that character, but we can kind of
Right.
but that consequences
And
happen, right?
right.
Yeah.
It is the opposite of my book, The I'm Sorry Story. It is the opposite.
Yeah.
And we talked about that. We talked about that because, like, it's not happily ever after. And it's also creepier, I think, that you don't like that they are short stories and you don't tell us how it ends. Not only is it a good learning moment to like keep on using your imagination, and frankly, I'm using it as writing prompts with my older two.
Yeah.
Like, what's happening? What do you, how would you like this to end? But I think it's even creepier, honestly, that we don't know how it ends because we think we know how it ends, but it could go either way. Now mine go right to the darkest way that it could end, and
Oh
I
yeah.
think that's
Me too.
probably why it's super creepy. We have talked. So I'm gonna put. We have talked so much. I keep forgetting to write or drop the links, and I'm gonna do that in just a moment. And you said it's about 10 minutes, so we are going to listen while Jeff reads my favorite one, Bad Moon Rising. And
All right.
I'm not going to say why it's my favorite, but if you know me, you probably will figure out why it's my favorite.
I haven't read this in I don't think I've read this out loud since I wrote it. So let's see how this goes. But before I do, the one thing to your point though, the way they end is we don't like I love that the scary stories end with ambiguity. Ambiguity we don't always
Right.
let our children like revel in like, well, I want a very clear-cut ending. I want resolution. But like there's something comforting and I think really important in not having always things don't always resolve. The story's over and you're left with a lot of questions. And I like
Yeah,
that. Um,
I
but
like
I
it
like David
too. You
Cronenberg
did
movies. That's right. Yeah.
well. Before you read, I just want to say that you write in a very very clever way, and the what how you integrate real life into it is just good to stop and discuss with your the young people that you're reading with, or if they may have questions. And I think that's why it is so clever. You did a very just spot on with your audience and pulling them in, and I completely agree about letting them grapple with the ambiguity because life is mostly ambiguous.
Yeah.
It's not cut and dry.
Like,
So yeah,
will
but go
my
ahead.
voice run out? But while I read the story, I don't know. We'll find out. Will it end with a hoarse whisper? All right. Bad Moon Rising. All right, there we go. Don't worry, Hero said, almost reaching up to put an arm on Liam's shoulder. He didn't, even though he could tell Liam was scared, even though maybe Liam did need a hand on his shoulder. It's only a drill. Hero could tell that Liam was watching their teacher, Mr. Reed, who stood at the doorway. Mr. Reed gave the hallway a quick scan and he closed the door and locked it. Get to your safe spot, Mr. Reed said, quietly, urgently. You've got to be kidding me, Danielle snapped, eyeing the clock on her phone. It's going to happen any second now. Seriously, agreed Nathan. He was holding a pair of sunglasses in his hands. Everyone in the room had a pair of glasses like Nathan's, with thick, polarized lenses. Even Mr. Reed had been holding a pair, but he put his down on the table closest to the door and he pointed at the students. This is a lockdown, he said, this time more forcefully. Lockdown drill, Nathan said, shaking his head. How could they schedule one today? Seriously, said Carter. He kept playing with his glasses, putting them on and taking them off. This is the weirdest schedule mix-up in the history of scheduling. I know the timing is terrible, but it's mandatory, said Mr. Reed. Please, go to your safe spot like we practiced, he told them again. Hero agreed with Danielle. Why would the principal schedule a drill now, of all times? Most of the students did as they were told, but after a few minutes, Hero noticed that some of them were slipping on their glasses and surreptitiously moving away from the safe spot in the far corner of the room toward the exterior window. Hero kept his eye on Liam, who hadn't budged. Liam had only been at the school for a few months, and Hero still didn't know too much about him. He knew that he and his dad moved around a lot. Liam hopped from school to school so often, he barely had time to make friends. But Hero liked Liam. It helped they were both into skateboarding and that they both sucked at skateboarding. Liam had the scars to prove it. Hero found it interesting that while Liam was never afraid to try out some crazy new skateboarding move, this lockdown drill was freaking him out. Liam whipped his head around. Mr. Reed locked the door, he said. Apparently, he did not know what a lockdown drill was. No one else seemed to care. They were too busy trying to stare out the window and at the sky. Don't they do lockdowns at your old school, Hero said? But Liam wasn't listening. He was fixated on the door. He still wasn't moving toward the safe spot, so Hero reached out and took him by the hand. But Liam flinched and he pulled his hand away. He looked absolutely terrified. You don't understand. You can't understand. Even if I told you. Told me what? Liam opened his mouth, about to spill everything. But then he noticed the kids by the window, hooting and nudging each other and playing with their special glasses. He shook his head. We don't have time for this. His gaze went back to the door and the clock above it. Boys, Mr. Reed said sternly. Hero tried not to roll his eyes. It wasn't like anyone else in the room was staying put. They were all elbowing each other for a spot by the window, either staring at the sky or playing with their phones. It's only a few minutes away, Danielle said. She had the special glasses on, and she was waving the class over. It looks amazing. Get away from that window, said Mr. Reed. Hero grabbed hold of Liam again and tried to drag him away from the door, but Liam's gaze was firmly locked on the clock. There's barely any time, Liam said. He dug into his pocket, and he pulled out his cell phone. Who are you calling? Hero asked. My brother. Liam didn't look up from the phone. You never told me you had a brother. Yeah, well, there's a lot about me you don't know, he said. He looked up. You got to get out of here, he said. You need to chill out, Hero said back. You don't understand, Liam said. It's not a drill. At the back of the room, by the open windows, excitement had begun to brew. It's starting, Nathan hooted. Don't look directly at it, Carter chimed in. About 7 or 8 other students were pressing so hard against the glass, Hero wondered if the window might pop out under their weight. Eclipse selfies, Danielle shouted. She held up her phone to record the image. Will you get away from that window, Mr. Reed snapped, although nobody was getting away from anything. It's against protocol. Don't worry, Mr. Reed, Nathan said. We won't look directly into the sun. We're not idiots, you know. He looked as if he was thinking through something, though. Hey, maybe that's why we're having the lockdown, because they don't trust us not to look at the sun. What do they think we are? Somebody else said. Morons? Hero was going to say something smart, but come on, it was the eclipse. How often did that happen? How often did a black cat enter my room in the middle of the story? Spooky, you're interrupting the story. He wanted to say hi. All right, Spooky, you're fine.
Hey, Spooky.
Spooky, don't ruin the story. How often did that happen?
He just adds.
Cats, tell you. Hero moved away from Liam. He'd be fine for a moment or two. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his special sunglasses and made his way to the window. He wedged himself between a couple of other kids to get a good view. Isn't it supposed to go totally dark or something? Danielle said, and she held her camera up and took more snaps. Dark, Hero said. That's only for like a few minutes. He turned to check on Liam, still by the door. Come on, come and take a look, Liam. It's safe if you wear your glasses. And then everything went dark. The class started hooting and cheering. Totality achieved, said Nathan. Hero saw it up there in the sky, the black disk of the moon, blotting out the sun, only a flickering circle of light bordering it. It was unreal, like something from a movie. Amazing, he said. And then he heard Liam pounding on the door. Come on, Liam, he said. We're only going to be stuck here for a few minutes. You don't even have to look in the sun. Settle down, everyone, Mr. Reed hissed to the class, maybe at Liam. There was so much going on now that Hero couldn't tell who was talking to who. Hero moved away from the others by the window to make sure that Liam was okay. It's not a drill, somebody said. Hero couldn't tell who. There's somebody out there. Look. They were all pointing now, only it wasn't at the sun, but something running through the playground. A man, but not a man. Nathan tore off his glasses and stared. Is that? His mouth dropped open. The class watched the figure approach the main doors, and Danielle screamed. Instantly, the bulk of students tore themselves away from the window, leaping over desks, knocking them and tripping them, and to cower in the safe spot in the dark corner of the room. And there was only silence for the first time that day. Only Mr. Reed stood by the window now, peering into the darkness. What? What is it? What did you see? His voice choked. It was hideous. Some kind of monster. Everyone was talking at once. Hero and Liam held their places by the door. You knew this was going to happen, Hero said, starting to piece it all together. Liam, still facing the door, only nodded. I'm sorry. Hero backed away. He had to get out of here. Get the keys from Mr. Reed, perhaps. Get past Liam. Only now there was someone trying to get into the school. From downstairs, even through the door, Hero heard the sound of breaking glass. And then screams. What's happening? My brother, Liam said. He's not safe. He's only trying to help me. What does he mean, his brother, Nathan said, still cowering. It wasn't even human. What? Hero said. But he could see from the look in Liam's eyes that Nathan was speaking the truth. I'm sorry, Liam said, first looking at Hero and then everyone else. Finn told me not to come today. He said the eclipse would make it happen, and I didn't believe him. I'm sorry, I was wrong. Liam hammered on the glass of the door. He turned to Mr. Reed and lunged at him. Give me the key. You've got to let me out. You've got to do it now. You're in danger. It's a lockdown, Mr. Reed said, his voice shaking. We're all in danger. Hero watched as Mr. Reed dug his hand into his pocket, probably checking that he still had the key. Liam, take a deep breath. This will all be over soon. And suddenly Liam dropped to his knees and started howling in pain. He clutched at his arms, his clothes, his hair. He scraped and scratched at every part of his body. No, he bellowed. Not again. Not here. Hero looked over at Mr. Reed. The rest of the class was silent. Liam had never gone into full-out crazy mode before, and here he was, thrashing around on the floor like an animal, kicking his legs so hard Hero was worried they might come off. One leg caught the edge of a desk and knocked it to the floor with a thunk, spilling the contents across the floor. Liam, Mr. Reed said, his voice shaking with rage or fear. It was hard to tell which. He had put himself between Liam and the rest of the class. This is a lockdown. It's not a drill. There's somebody in the building. That shut everybody up. Liam moved from a fit of screaming to a series of gasps, like he was running out of air. Hero, the only kid not in the corner with the rest of the students, peered through the window in the door, trying to get a look down the hall, but it was dark because of the eclipse. Was someone out there? We're going to get you out of here, Hero found himself saying. Just hold tight, Liam. Everything's going to be okay. Liam, writhing on the floor with his head pressed against the cold tiles, gave a grunt, a low, deep grunt. Hero extended a shaky hand towards him. Trust me, you're safe. But you're not, Liam shot back in a distorted voice that was so wild it made Hero jump. Liam's voice wasn't the only thing that had distorted. It was hard to make out in the near darkness, but now that Hero's eyes adjusted, he could see tears along the seams of Liam's clothing, like he'd burst out of them. Liam stood up slowly. Now Hero understood. Full moon, he said, or tried to say, but the words wouldn't come from his lips. Liam stood well over 6 feet tall now. Thick, grisly arms jutted far beyond the torn rags that had once been his clothing. His feet were now massive, elongated, and sporting sharp, bloody claws. The werewolf stood there, panting. Hero looked into the creature's gleaming yellow eyes, searching for any sign of his friend. Liam, he managed weakly. Liam's not here right now, the creature muttered. It licked its muzzle with a long, pink tongue. From the pocket of Liam's tattered jeans, the creature produced a pair of polarized shades and slipped them on. But don't worry, he'll only be gone a few minutes. Dum dum dum. You always have to end the story like that. Dum dum dum. The 3 chords. Oh, thank you. Spooky enjoyed.
That was awesome.
Thank you.
Good. Spooky was going across. It was kind of like, strobe light. He added
that
to
was
the
my
effect.
life as
It was
a
awesome.
virtual school teacher last year. It was all about that.
When you reach total, I thought maybe if I cover my camera, I'll reach totality as well, but it didn't work. You can just see my thumbprint. So that was stupid. But no, that was great. And I laughed when we finished this as well. Like, it's just so funny. You did a great job, even with your voice. I appreciate so much that you read it, even though you are losing your voice as we speak. Thank you so much. Everybody who, my friend Rochelle said hi, and thank you for watching. I feel like,
Hi,
Jeff, you said your parents.
Hi, Mom. Hi,
parents
Dad.
will
Are
say
you
hi.
still watching? Or did you turn it off to watch something else? Find out.
Right.
Yeah.
I hope that everybody watching will check out Jeff's, and I'm going to put it up right up again. Check out his website. It is awesome. And I put up your different socials. What is the social that you like the best, Jeff?
Oh, I've been enjoying Instagram because I can put my pictures of record albums on the front. Twitter's, and I do Twitter when I have something to tweet out, but I've been enjoying Instagram. I've been trying out TikTok too, because that's where all the cool kids are at now. They're on TikTok, so I've been making TikTok videos. So,
and I dropped your TikTok link, and I can do that again. I'm going to check
great.
it out myself. I know my kids will. Oh, and you also share the lunchroom. So this is another story in Tales from the Fringes of Fear, the lunchroom, and you shared on a YouTube. I dropped that. So thank you for sharing that with us. These are great. If you are in the classroom or even with your kids, you just here's your Instagram. Y'all this guy is awesome. You're a great author. I have enjoyed this so much. Thank you so much. I'm going to have you back on with your wife as well, because she's an author, and that just sounds like an amazing duo that you both are. Oh, what were you going to say?
Oh, Mr. Drashing wants to say hi. Hi. Mr. Drashing, you want to say hi? Yes. Okay. Did you have fun? Yes. Okay. That's it? Yes. All right. Not much to say today.
That's awesome. And that was Mr. Drashing?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you all so much. Back here. Yeah.
Yes, I'm sure. Thank you so much for doing that and that read aloud. I'm going to put my outro on, but don't you leave. Everybody else, we'll see you next week with another spooky book. Amanda Fox joins us with Teaching Land and zombie design thinking. So we'll see you again. Oh, somebody's coming in. Somebody is. Oh, is this your mom? Hi, Gina. Oh.
What? Oh, Mom. Wait, how can you be watching CNN and this you're watching both simultaneously? More interesting. That's so my mom. That's hilarious.
That's awesome. I can see where you get your sense of humor.
Yes.
Awesome. All right. Well, I am going to find the button here for the outro. I am terrible. I'm not smooth doing this at all, but we'll see you next week, everybody. Thank you, Jeff.